The Nintendo Switch released on March 3rd, 2017. It was met with immediate commercial success, but continued to grow, now making it one of the greatest selling consoles ever released. Over the years, the console has amassed a library of amazing games, making it my favourite video game console of all time. Today, I plan to rank every Nintendo Switch game I've ever played, and share my thoughts on them with you all. It took me a while to get into Animal Crossing New Horizons, but once I really sat down and played through it, I loved what I played. I understand that the life simulation style of game isn't for everybody, but when I'm in the right mood for it, it's a really calming game that I always have a lot of fun with. I don't come back to the game very often, but it's very charming and I'd say I'm a fan of it. B tier. I want to get into Cadence of Hyrule, Crypt of the Necrodancer, but I just haven't gotten around to it yet. The game looks really nice and has a great concept, being a roguelike rhythm game. When recording footage for this video, I found it to be a lot of fun, despite being very bad at it. I think I'll give it another try soon. B tier. Celeste is the kind of game that I can't get enough of. Being able to constantly throw myself at a challenge with essentially no pause in between attempts lets me really understand what I'm doing wrong and see clear improvement in every attempt. Celeste is easily one of the best games I've ever played, and definitely my favourite indie game. I highly recommend it. A tier. I really liked Death Squared when I first played it, but after revisiting it recently, I think it's just okay. It has a strong emphasis on coordination between players, but it often just ends up with one player telling the other exactly what to do to solve the puzzle. Also, the narrators are really annoying. C tier. As much as I've tried to get into Donkey Kong Country Tropical Freeze, it just never hooks me. I appreciate that it's meant to be challenging, but at times I find it to be unfair and just not very fun. I do want to see it through to the end one day, but I've tried like 3 times now and I've never finished it. C tier. While some people have a comfort food or comfort show, I have a comfort game. Super Mario Odyssey is a game that I can always come back to, especially when I just need to turn my brain off and play something fun for a couple of hours. The game's capturing mechanics are always really fun to play around with, and the movement in this game is the most fluid, satisfying movement I've ever experienced. I've 100%ed the game 3 times now, and I've sunk countless hours into speedrunning it as well. It's almost always my go-to game when I want something to play before starting something new, so I can't recommend this game enough. It's undoubtedly one of the best games on the Switch. S tier. I think Fall Guys is one of the worst games I've ever played. I do like the concept of using extremely clunky controls to navigate a simple environment, but Fall Guys feels so awful to control that it just isn't fun for me. However, I do acknowledge that playing the Switch version contributed to my dissatisfaction, even if it was just marginally. Until I'm convinced otherwise, D tier. Tetris 99 was the first game in the 99 series, and it's probably the best one. The concept of multiplayer Tetris has been around for years, but this game made what was once a simple versus mode into a 99-player battle royale, and it works really well. Although quite difficult, the game is a lot of fun and I like it a lot. However, the game is quite dead now, so lobbies are full of bots. B tier. F-Zero 99, on the other hand, is just okay. It took the original F-Zero from the SNES and turned it into a battle royale, and it works quite well, but it died less than a week after it came out, so it doesn't have much value anymore. C tier. I think I would have enjoyed Hollow Knight a lot more if I'd known more about it going in. Because I went into the game completely blind, I often found myself getting lost when travelling to new areas, especially later in the game, which caused me to spend multiple hours wandering aimlessly, with no idea where to find the one hole in the wall which will take me where I need to go. From what I've seen, people who love this game have seen videos on it before playing it, have followed guides occasionally, or have played through it multiple times, and I think if I wasn't trying to be as blind as possible, I would have loved it too. On my first playthrough of Ocarina of Time, which is one of my favourite games, I got stuck and looked up guides all the time, but when I come back to the game now, I have that prior knowledge to point me in the right direction, even if I don't remember the exact solution to every obstacle the game throws at me. For this reason, I don't hold my problems with Hollow Knight's exploration against it. Rather, I found the exploration difficult to enjoy blind. On a more positive note, something that I really enjoyed about Hollow Knight was the boss fights. I found repeatedly throwing myself at a boss, learning its patterns, and improving with every attempt really enjoyable. The combat was the best part of Hollow Knight for me. Despite finding it frustrating at times, I think Hollow Knight is a solid game that deserves a second chance sometime in the future. B tier. Although quite forgettable, Age of Calamity is a really cool game. Being able to play through the backstory of Breath of the Wild in an entirely different genre to the original game is still so cool to me. However, this game makes some changes to the story so that instead of fighting towards inevitable defeat, they pull some time travel nonsense so that the Calamity can be prevented. I think it would have been more interesting if the story wasn't changed at all, but I'm still very happy with the game that Age of Calamity is. The combat control's great and is really satisfying. Besides the story, I think it does everything pretty much perfectly. A tier. Persona 5 Strikers is similar to Age of Calamity, in that it takes an existing game and expands on its story in the hack and slash genre, except this time it's a canon sequel to Persona 5. I think the game perfectly turns Persona 5 into a hack and slash, and it has some really great songs in its soundtrack, but it just never hooked me. I got bored during the third jail and never finished it, probably because I was really bad at it. I'll probably come back to it at some point, but for now, B tier. Jump Rope Challenge is just a simple skipping simulator for the Switch, made to help people keep active during lockdown. It does everything it tries to do fine, but at the end of the day, it's just a skipping simulator. I wish there was more I could say about it. C tier. Kirby and the Forgotten Land is a great example of a game for small children that can still be enjoyed by older audiences. It's one of those games where you can really tell just how much the developers cared when creating it. It's not hard by any means, but it's a good time if you're feeling like playing an easier, more laid-back game. I like it a lot. A tier. Let's Sing 2023 is just like SingStar but slightly worse. While it still allows users to purchase additional songs, they come in bundles, leaving you with songs that you don't want. The bundles are also specific to each of the yearly Let's Sing installments. I hate pointless annual releases. C tier. Link's Awakening on Switch is a perfect remake of the original on the Game Boy. It's a very faithful remake, only modernising the game's art style and controls, and is a phenomenal experience all the way through. However, it does have the same issues with being unclear as the Game Boy version. That being said, it still tells an amazing story, has a phenomenal soundtrack, looks beautiful, and feels great to play. A tier. Mario Kart 8 Deluxe is my favourite Mario Kart. It controls really well, has the largest selection of tracks out of any Mario Kart game, and is so incredibly polished overall. Also, ignoring the early DLC tracks, I'd say it's one of the best looking games on the Switch. I think it's a must-have for any Switch owner. A tier. I had been wanting to play Mario Party Superstars for around a year before I finally bought it, and thankfully it lived up to my expectations. The game has a satisfying balance of skill and luck, keeping the playing field mostly even when playing with my friends who aren't familiar with the game, and remains surprisingly engaging for a digital board game. I'm a big fan of Mario Party Superstars, and it solidified itself as one of my go-to party games. A tier. Metroid Dread was my introduction to the Metroid series, and I don't think I could have had a better start. It's one of the most impressive looking games on the Switch, feels amazing to control, and is extremely challenging at times. I feel similarly about the boss fights in this game to how I feel about the levels in Celeste. You can really feel like you're improving with every attempt at a boss, which is great because the game's final boss is absolutely brutal. Also, the Emmy robots you encounter throughout the game are some of my favourite enemies out of any video game I've played, and are genuinely terrifying. I recommend this game to anyone who wants a challenging game on the Switch, but you should probably wait until it's on sale. It's very expensive for a game that probably won't even last you 10 hours on your first playthrough. Still, S tier. Metroid Prime Remastered is structured like a Metroidvania, but as a first-person shooter in a 3D environment. The game looks absolutely phenomenal, and creates such an interesting world for the player to explore. Every little detail in this game, from an alarm blaring in time with the background music to Samus's reflection in her visor when there's a big flash of light, makes the game feel really thought out. I really like this game and recommend it if it seems interesting to you. A tier. Many people complain that the Mii Maker on Switch feels lifeless, which I understand but don't really agree with. It doesn't have a camera mode or background music like some of the other Mii Makers do, but it allows for the widest range of colours of any Mii Maker, making it my go-to platform to make Miis. C tier. I liked what I played of Miitopia when I first played it, but I never got around to finishing it. Having to make new Miis for every character you encounter can get quite tedious, but if the game didn't have the Miis in it, it would just be a really generic, boring RPG. There are so many amazing RPGs on the Switch, so I just wouldn't bother with this game. C tier. What I loved about the original Overcooked was the perfect mix of the simplicity of its control scheme and the sheer anarchy of the environments you're placed in. Overcooked 2 lessens the game's simplicity, spits in my face, and calls me rude names. The throwing mechanic feels needlessly tacked on and leads to frustrating moments that feel completely out of the player's control. Even the dedicated swearing button has been replaced with an annoying menu for callouts, as if anyone would use those instead of just speaking to the person they're playing with. I hate Overcooked 2, it is my least favourite game of all time, and it's personal. F tier. Pikuniku is a game where you play as a weird red thing with big legs as you uncover a corrupt billionaire's plan to destroy the world. Although short, the game is overflowing with charm due to its simplistic visuals, great writing, and playful soundtrack. It's a silly little puzzle platformer that I really enjoy and would recommend if you see it on sale for a low price. B tier. Like most free-to-play Pokemon spin-offs, Pokemon Unite is not very good. The game feels so sluggish and I never found it enjoyable. I understand that this style of game is appealing to some people, but I don't like it at all. D-tier. Portal has been established as one of the most iconic games of all time, and after playing it, I see why it's such a classic. The game is short, but the portal gun leads to some really interesting puzzles to solve. I look forward to playing the sequel at some point. B-tier. Rocket League's low skill floor was a really big obstacle for me when I first played the game, so I didn't find it fun enough to get into it. If I had taken the time to really familiarise myself with the game, I might have enjoyed it a lot more, but I don't care enough to practice it. However, I do enjoy watching people play the game competitively, as it's pretty easy to get your head around. C-tier. I only played Screen Cheat once at a friend's house, and I liked the concept of it. Its gimmick of only being able to see other players by looking at their screens is quite novel, but I don't think it's interesting enough to warrant a whole game. I think it would work best as a side mode in other games, rather than as a standalone title. C-tier. I think Skyward Sword HD is a really good Zelda game. Many people didn't like the original because of its janky control scheme, but the remaster fixes that completely, allowing the player to control Link entirely with button controls, while still allowing the option for the original motion inputs. I think the game has some of the best dungeons and bosses in the series, and the more linear structure allows it to have a stronger focus on its story. I also found myself getting stuck significantly less in this game than I have in other, more traditional Zeldas. I would recommend this game to any Zelda fan, especially those looking for a game to transition them from the newer style of Zelda to the more traditional 3D Zeldas. A-tier. Splatoon 2 has some solid online modes, but there's not much reason to go back to those after the release of Splatoon 3. Instead, what I love so much about Splatoon 2 is the music and the story modes. The base game story mode is a sequel to the one from the first game, where you play as a new agent and are led by Marie, who is probably my favourite character out of any work of fiction. The interactions between Marie and the player are really charming, and the levels are really enjoyable for the most part. The DLC story mode, Octo Expansion, has a significant jump in difficulty from the base game story mode, and is really enjoyable. It has an amazing aesthetic, a great soundtrack, and provides a ton of backstory for the game's characters. I'd say it's the best Splatoon story mode. Splatoon 2's phenomenal story modes and the time I sunk into the online modes years ago makes Splatoon 2 easily one of my favourite games. S-tier. Splatoon 3 is the latest release in the Splatoon series, meaning it has a much more lively online scene than its predecessors, as well as various improvements in control and overall quality of life. The Salmon Run mode has been improved a lot as well, which I think is great because it's my favourite mode. I really like the game overall, but I can't say I like it as much as 2. I feel like the game's identity isn't as strong as the previous games in the series, and the 3 idol gimmick led to some really lacking Splatfest themes, unfortunately causing me to not play in many of them. As for the story mode, I really like the individual levels and overall story a lot, but the way the mode is structured incentivized me to skip as many levels as possible on my first playthrough, instead of seeing what each of them had to offer. However, I did end up going back and playing them all after beating the game, so I could play the Champions Road-esque level at the end, which is a super cool addition. The DLC story mode Side Order is a highlight of Splatoon 3 for me. It turned Splatoon into a roguelike, which was really unexpected, but surprisingly well executed. Despite the nitpicks I have with the game, Splatoon 3 is great overall, but I think I like Splatoon 2 just a little bit more. A-tier. The Stanley Parable Ultra Deluxe is an incredibly weird game. You play as a man named Stanley running around an empty office while a narrator talks over the game. While the gameplay involves nothing but walking around, the narrator is so entertainingly written that the game is really enjoyable every time I come back to it. I'd recommend checking this game out in some way, even if that's just by watching a YouTube video on it. B-tier. Suika Game went incredibly viral when it came out, and for a good reason. It's a really fun, addictive puzzle game that mixes elements of Tetris and 2048, which are some of the most popular high-score-based puzzle games of all time. Although I haven't played a ton of it, I think it's really good. B-tier. Super Mario 3D All-Stars is a collection of enhanced ports of Super Mario 64, Sunshine, and Galaxy. It's a great collection that I really enjoyed my time with. However, it was a limited release due to it being part of a Mario anniversary celebration, so you can't buy it anymore. I'd like to rank this game really high, but it's a collection, so that wouldn't be very fair. B-tier. Super Mario 3D World plus Bowser's Fury is a must-have for any Mario fan. It's a port of Mario 3D World from the Wii U with a ton of quality of life improvements, plus an entire Mario Odyssey-esque side game. Both are really good games that I highly recommend. A-tier. Super Mario Bros. Wonder was Mario's long-awaited return to 2D, and I don't think Nintendo could have done a better job. I'm not usually the biggest fan of the 2D Marios, but I really enjoyed playing through this one. The game's great roster of power-ups and playable characters, and every level's unique wonder effect makes things never feel stale or boring. It's not a game that I often go back to, but when I do, it's a lot of fun. A-tier. The concept of a Mario game with infinite levels was appealing to me, so when I picked up Mario Maker 2, I was excited to see all the amazing content the game would have. The game has countless amazing levels that I have really enjoyed playing through, but unfortunately, not every level in the game can meet that same level of quality. In fact, I'd say at least half of the levels in this game are just not worth playing at all. That being said, I do still enjoy playing this game, I just tend to play specific popular levels instead of the endless mode. B tier. Super Smash Bros. Ultimate is one of my favourite games to play when I have friends over. The massive character roster ensures almost anyone can find a character who they're familiar with and enjoy playing as. It's so cool to me that so many of my favourite characters are in the one game, especially those from third parties, which I'm sure was a licensing nightmare. There are hundreds of hours of fun to be had with this game, partly due to the many additional modes like Classic Mode and World of Light. I think it's a must-have for any Switch owner. A tier. There's so much that I love about Breath of the Wild. The game's open world was absolutely groundbreaking for its time due to its large scale and consistent level of substance wherever the player travels to. The various locations around Hyrule all feel believable and lived in, so I was excited to explore new parts of the game on my first playthrough. Also, the way the game presents challenges, particularly enemy encounters to the player, is really interesting to me. Beyond attacking enemies head-on, there's almost always another way the player can take advantage of the landscape, weather, or enemies' unique attributes to come out on top. Creativity and experimentation is at the core of everything Breath of the Wild tries to do, and it leads to feelings of discovery and accomplishment unlike any other game I've played. Of course, the game isn't perfect, but I love it to death. Breath of the Wild is the definition of a system-selling game, and I think a large portion of the Switch's success, at least in its early days, can be accredited to it. If you have a Switch and haven't played it yet, I can't recommend it enough. It was my favourite game for so many years, and it's still among my favourites to this day. S tier. Tears of the Kingdom was the long-awaited sequel to Breath of the Wild, and I would say it's a better game overall. It improves upon Breath of the Wild in almost every way, having more content, better dungeons, and more interesting mechanics. However, as much as I try to care about Tears of the Kingdom, I don't like it nearly as much as its predecessor. While it's great that the game makes these various improvements, it doesn't bring much brand new to the table. So many times throughout my first playthrough I thought, oh, this is like that thing from Breath of the Wild, but better. Which was really enjoyable when playing for the first time, but caused the game to have a much lesser impact on me in the long term compared to Breath of the Wild, as it wasn't trying much that was new. The only brand new ideas in the game that really stand out to me are the building and a select few moments from the story, which I found really cool. That being said, I did enjoy my time with this game, even if it hasn't had the biggest impact on me. If you're like me and enjoyed Breath of the Wild and wish there was more of it to play, you will like Tears of the Kingdom. A tier.